welcome to today's event. Always nice to get a round of applause before you start, in the vain hope that you can keep it going. We're here to launch Bring Me the Sports Jacket of Arthur Montford, an adventure through Scottish football by, of course, the inimitable Aidan Smith. Let's hear it for Aidan. So many stories in this miscellany of Scottish culture, but I wanted to kind of actually start off with some of the broader themes. Let's just start off with Arthur Montford himself. Is he a character that you've met and interviewed over the years? And if so, where would you place him in the pantheon of Scottish football?
He's right at the top, isn't he, Stuart? I mean, he's the custodian of the game. He's your favourite uncle. He's the guy who you waited for on Sundays in Scotsport.
Yeah.
I mean, the starting point for this book was a suggestion that, a bit of artistic licence, that you couldn't wait for Glenn Michael's Cavalcade to finish for Scotsport. The idea that you didn't want you wanted these rubbishy cartoons out of the way because you wanted
the biggies,
Arthur and 10 minutes of a Muirton Park monsoon on a wooden tripod camera, with Arthur commentating on that. I enjoyed the cartoons, but I thought I'll go with this. I'll go with this as being what we all wanted, which was remember what Sundays were like. Scotsport was it.
Well, television was actually still in its innovative and maybe you might say primitive era, because they learned very much from Arthur's dog-tooth jacket that it created video noise. And I think that was one of the first times, even to this day, they'll say, don't wear checks, just wear whatever you're wearing, whatever.
There's a poignant little tale which I put to him when I met him, the one and only time I've interviewed him, sadly no longer with us, of course. But there was a wee ad, it was picked up by the Sunday Mail. There was in the wanted notices of a paper, he was searching for a sledge, which was his as a kid. He told me about it. It had steering, it had his father's ship in the war, Eglinton, written underneath, and he lost it as he put it, the melee of a divorce. He lost it and his stamp album.
Wow. And
I thought that was interesting that you used the word melee, because he didn't use the word stramash.
Yeah.
Now, if Arthur was somebody who had an ego, I mean, maybe everyone in TV has an ego. I don't know. I would think him the least. Then he would have used stramash the whole time. He would have had cards saying stramash, which he'd hand out to you, some American game show host or something.
Yeah.
Well, but that wasn't him.
No, interestingly enough, he's the only person I can remember that's appeared on Off the Ball over the 20-odd years of that radio show who's actually handwritten as a letter thanking us for being on the show. Now, there's a touch of class about that. Not interested in email or text or anything. A handwritten letter from Arthur Montford. And that brings me to my first big question of the launch, Aidan, and it's about the nature of nostalgia. You know, I think that all of us in the room, and certainly for the two of us, we've known each other for many years now, we love going back to those golden eras. Would you say that nostalgia is kind to Scottish football, or is it a bit of a curse?
Being the age I am, I would say kind.
Yeah.
Being the grumpy, mature fan who struggles with, the starting point for this book was a piece in an English newspaper saying Scottish football is the most uncompetitive league in the world. And I don't hold with stats at all. No. I mean, that is a stat that is probably true.
Not if you're talking about the championship this season.
But that's a stat that's probably true in its basic sense. But I think stats are wrong. I mean, David Beckham, I don't know why I've mentioned him, but David Beckham, there would be stats showing he ran 1,000,000 miles in a game.
Yeah.
But I remember him as the guy who wanted football to be static, who wanted to play it like gridiron or golf. The ball had to be stationary for one of his Hollywood free kicks.
Yeah.
So these stats don't add up. The stats that say most passes completed.
Yeah.
You know, what does that
matter? Centre back to right back.
What does that matter if they're all behind the halfway line?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And this stuff's trotted out. So I thought for the book, well, that is true in one sense, but there are characters and innovators in our game, which I've tried to celebrate, you know.
I saw a thing, you know, online. You see these little things that come up, and there's a tendency for, you know, in the global game for people to be cynical about Scottish football and whatever. And I saw one of these kind of shock jock type interviews with a character called Jason Cundy, and he kept shouting, "Scottish football, bang average, bang average, bang average." And I thought, you know, who exactly is Jason Cundy? You know, the idea that somehow this guy has lit up football in the world, you know, it's very easy to be cynical about football. What I think's actually harder is to find the gold, to pan for the great stories. And one of the things I love about your writing, and actually about this book, is it's just rich with great characters and stories. So I've got to ask you the favourite one, the one that Aidan Smith thinks, yeah, dancer, I got that one.
Goodness me. What would it be? I mean, there are. I would not mean to blow my own trumpet, but the innovating thing about the innovatory thing about Scottish football. Jimmy Ledbetter. Don't know if anybody will have heard of him.
Ipswich Town.
Yeah. But if it wasn't for him, England wouldn't have won the World Cup. Mm. He was an aged player. Nobody was ever sure of his age. Alf Ramsey was the manager of Ipswich at the time. And he had no money to spend, so he kind of remodelled his team and made Jimmy, who was a winger, this kind of mysterious character in the middle, which completely confused the fullbacks of the day. Yeah,
and he was kind of like a floating number 10 or something like that.
Yeah, and Ipswich won the league. And Cohen and Wilson, the England fullbacks from '66, were just bamboozled by this. Mm-hmm. They called him Sticks. That was his nickname because he was so spindly that his shin pads would meet at the back. You could wrap them around his legs.
And I've seen photographs of Jimmy Ledbetter, and you're right, he defies age, doesn't he? It looks like he's maybe somebody's granddad.
People thought he was Alf's dad. People thought he got in the team because he was Alf Ramsey's dad. Another innovator, Willie Carr. Do you remember the donkey kick?
Brilliant. I mean, when you're a kid, you run out and try that, flicking it up and letting Ernie Hunt score the goal.
In our playground, you be Ernie, I'll be Willie. Ernie Hunt scores the goal, Willie Carr flicks it up, and it's something which was very quickly banned because the ball didn't travel its full circumference and was touched by both feet.
Touched by both feet, so you passed it to yourself effectively. Yeah. Brilliant. Great. I mean, even to this day, I love looking. Ronnie Radford died yesterday, and that kind of era of those big games, of which the Willie Carr Ernie Hunt goal was one of them, and Radford's goal against Newcastle was another.
Scots were first to play in Albania. There's a country very much in the news just now, of course, but Kilmarnock, Tommy McLean's Kilmarnock were first to play there. Scots were first to. England were quite cool about taking inloads of foreigners. Well, we still are. But if you remember the Scandinavian invasion of Morton.
Boy, do I remember it. Yeah.
You know?
And Dundee United as well at the same time.
Yes,
and,
that's right.
And
some of these guys went on to play for Rangers. Eric Sorensen.
Well, I saw Morton, talking about innovation, I saw them at the old Muirton Park. Hal Stewart was their chairman. And he had this idea that Morton would play better in kind of grueling, kind of midweek rainy nights if they had high-vis shirts. So they'd turn up, I mean, literally as if they were kind of working on the roads at night, and they would have these high-vis shirts, and they were guys that were from Denmark, part-time players, who thought Scottish football was a place of riches and splendour and all the rest of it. Wonderful time in the game. Is it the greatest era, or is the early 70s of your romantic Hibernian team the real era?
For me it is, for me. But I can't argue with a younger person talking about the new firm of the 80s in Aberdeen and Dundee United. You know, I wasn't the same wide-eyed, impressionable boy then, but so I respect that. In interviewing players, it's difficult to the modern player, the media-trained modern player, who hasn't lived, who's not had another job, who's not had A Christmas consisting of one sweetie and one uncrackable nut, which was Dennis Law's story to me, you know. I'm not saying you have to have had hardship, but you certainly appreciate what you then become.
And maybe the academy system means that a decent player, or a person that becomes a proven professional, has entered the game at the age of 14, playing in atrium-style kind of bounce games, and they're just a different character. And they've not been apprentices, and they've not worked in the jobs market. And
no, they've not done that thing of cleaning the stadium. Cleaning the boots, etc. So, in answer to your question, does nostalgia hold us back? I don't know. We need to celebrate it, keep celebrating it, but that may just be an old fan talking here, Stuart.
Yeah, indeed. I'm going to kind of ask you about some of the stories in the book, and inevitably, I don't know if he's someone that the audience are familiar with. It was a guy called Adolf Hitler. What role he plays in the book?
That was a game, 1942, the Hibs Hearts derby, the New Year's Day game of that winter, and it was this went. I don't think it went as high as Downing Street, but it certainly went as high as some military command, because it was a foggy day, and that was bad because it was cover for Messerschmitts coming to bomb Edinburgh. So the Jerrys would be listening in to our radio to see what Scottish and Edinburgh life was like, to see what we were doing. So they decided, even though this game was never going to be played because you could not see the hand in front of your face, they decided that they would have to fake this game. So all the players turned up, all the fans were told to come along.
Yeah.
And I went out on radio, and a guy called Rex Kingsley commentated on the game with the help of runners. With the help of runners, people would run down the touchline and say they'd seen something, they'd come back and report to him, and he'd try and do it in a commentary style. But that became impossible because even the runners couldn't see anything. So he had to magic up the whole thing. A free jazz commentator, describing the game so that if the Germans were listening in, they would know that, hang on, this is not a day to bomb Edinburgh and blitz the Forth Bridge, We'll leave it for today. So Hibs and Hearts told Adolf Hitler to fog off. That was it. They never got anywhere near him that day.
I know that you like your big teams and whatever, but the story that gets me with Adolf Hitler is that the outbreak of the war in 1939, the invasion of Poland, you may have forgotten this, but Alloa Athletic were top of their league, and then when they regrouped after the war, they regionalised it and they stayed in the division that they'd been in. So Adolf Hitler stopped Alloa getting promoted. There's a lot to be said for these. These
Alloa get in the book in a section on food, the Wasp Burger, black pudding, bacon, potato scone. What a treat!
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Do you need access for these stories or not? A lot of them are born out of very clever interviews you do with people where you seem to kind of dig into an area of their life that's not kind of normally known. For example, I'm quite happy to concede I had never known that Willie Donachie had read War and Peace.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Or it's not a lesser thing for Bobby Lennox and Jimmy Johnson to be fans of J.T. Edson, the cowboy author,
guy,
all written from a semi in Melton Mowbray, never been to America at all, but he wrote 1 million books on cowboys, and I love the idea of these two guys swapping books down at Sea Mill, training. Jock Steen's checking that everyone's okay, and they're just sort of running. And these two guys, the J.T. Edson books were Johnson and Lennox would be wondering when the first girl-on-girl fight would be, because that was the big thing about J.T. Edson's books. There'd be two girls fighting in the bar. Willie Donachie, fascinating guy, mostly spiritualism, Herman Hesse books first of all, but he's reading on the Manchester City bus War and Peace when everyone else is playing cards. Amazing.
It is quite extraordinary.
And George McCluskey trying to change the course of musical history.
To help me with that one, sorry?
So he's a young player at Celtic. He's in a youth tournament in France, this is happening at the same time as the Cannes Film Festival. George is sent out with another young lad from the Scottish under-19s team, I suppose, to get pizza, well, to get food, because they're all a bit starving before the big game the next day. And he's never seen there's a pizza stall, and he's never seen these circular foodstuffs before, so he's puzzling over the menu. This yellow 2CV screeches to a halt. Out get Mick Jagger and the rest of the Rolling Stones. And he gets chatting to Ronnie Wood. And they're chatting away, what are you doing, how's it going at Cannes, and how's your football going, etc. And he's trying to he says, Ronnie, what are you doing joining the Rolling Stones? You should stay with the Faces. Mm-hmm. And he persists with this 19-year-old gallus Scottish footballer. It's not a problem to him to take Ronnie down a bit. But they get on well enough to the extent that Ronnie then invites George along to a party. Presumably the Stones were staying at some sort of French mansion, Anita Pallenberg and whoever would be there. There's no thanks, we've got a big game the next day and the pizzas are getting cold,
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just ask you, as I gallop through the book, there's things that kind of catch my eye. And one, for example, was John Lambie character. Tell me something about John Lambie I don't already know.
Well, I thought I'd stumbled across something that everyone knew because it was in his Wikipedia entry, saying that John Lambie, since retirement from football, was into erotic art. He had paintings and sculptures. So I'm armed with this. I'm not thinking this is a revelation because it is in Wikipedia and everyone reads that. So I go along there and he's in his slippers and he's in his wee Bathgate house, and I ask him this straight off, looking around expecting to see some examples of this, but it was a whole load of rubbish. So that got the interview off to a ripping start. Somebody's been at it.
Somebody's been at it, yeah.
But he was very difficult to find anything new about because everyone knows that wake him up. Quick before he wakes up, tell him he's Pelly. The story with the
all
sponge.
Of that story, yeah. And of course, featured for St Johnstone, the team that I love, in the Bernabeu Stadium in a pre-season. It was an invitation tournament, a glamour tournament, where St Johnstone were invited to the Bernabeu, and
they led the game at one point, didn't they?
They were 1-0 up, yes, until John Lambie literally halved Hento, the winger, and was disciplined, sent off against St Johnstone. 3-1 it was in the end. It was not bad, not bad at all. But I'm interested as well in the fact that you go over. I would say some of these people. I'm looking at Tony Green. We mentioned Willie Carr. We mentioned Willie Donachie.
That's a type, Stuart. That's a Scottish archetype, isn't it? The wee diddle-doddle, patter merchant, midfield creative that we used to turn out all the time, and everybody had one. We made big ships and we made wee guys to play in the middle of the park. Mm. So I thought, hang on, I've got to include all of these guys. So Tony Green gets mentioned. He's a Hartford. Things you don't know about footballers. I suppose coming from a feature background rather than being a sports writer all my life, I'm kind of interested in the person. So, he's a Hartford's the most politically astute footballer I've ever encountered. Probably a communist.
Yeah. He was famous probably for his hole in the heart, which at the time was quite a remarkable.
That was a dramatic story.
Yeah, huge
story. Because
no
one had heard of that as a condition. Everyone assumed something like that.
That you were near dead.
Yes, absolutely. Never mind not playing for Leeds on Saturday. Archie Gemmill is there, of course, too. So all these guys get a chapter, as they should, I think.
I fondly remember in the early days of Off the Ball when we could take calls. Now, of course, it's more through social media and that. But back in those days when we could take calls, we put out one debate on the show about where were you when Archie scored that goal. So it was inviting people to say, they were 14 and they were, at home in Morton and Greenock or whatever it was they were saying. And there was just some remarkable tales because, people were in things like Papua New Guinea and all of that when Archie Gemmill got the goal. And
where were you?
You know what? I was in Hull at university watching it on the telly and kind of dying for Scotland to get back into the tournament. And for a moment, it promised that would be the case. The best call we got was the producer said in my ear, we've got a guy for Clyde Bank that claims that he was there on the day. So the call comes through, and I said, so caller, where were you when Archie scored the goal? He says, I was 10 yards away from the greedy bastard. and it was Asa Hartford. And Asa said, watch the film. He could have just put it sideways to me and I'd tapped it in, but he had to go on a wee mazy run and all the rest of it.
It's the idea that in the stand were the guys who'd failed in the previous games, the Don Massons of this world and so on, they were saying, Christ, Archie, what are you doing? Yeah. In other words, 3-1 up, one more and we're through. Yeah. And everyone else wanted to come home. Yeah. Probably most of the team wanted to come home. Yeah. They'd had enough of that experience. And they thought at 3-1 that we were going to qualify.
Could do it, yeah. Do you, I mean, it's no great secret that you're a Hibernian fan. How important is that club to your life? You've caught me at a moment when I'm not that into it, really.
Seriously? You know, yeah.
Sad news for Ryan Porteous, who's at the back of the room there.
I think what it is my 15-year-old son is. I've written about this in the paper. He's saying, Dad, I'd like to go with my pals to a game now. And I'm feeling like the spare part. Having taken him, dragged him from the ages of 3 3/4 or whatever to games, he doesn't need me as the chaperone now. So I've just kind of let him go off and do his own thing. And maybe, you know, I'm not a glory hunter, but maybe winning the cup was my work.
Like the kind of a great moment.
Not my work is done, but and you know what it is. That team was 8 out of 11 Scots. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a team being, you know, flags of all nations, but I don't have the same kinship with the current. I mean, it's been shambolic. You know, all these different managers they've had in very quick succession. So it'll settle down, and I'll no doubt be back there. But just at the moment, just
it's
taking
not
time
the same
out
for you. So, in a sense, when you think of Hibs, when you're, you know, imagining your love affair with the club,
I'm back in 1972.
You're 72 in your mind, and who are the players you're seeing in this romantic game?
Oh, well, it's the whole team. I remember having to remember up at the swimming pool in Perth during the October week, taking all my kids there, getting a locker, and it was 279, and to me that was John Brownlee, Alex Edwards, Alan Gordon, and it was the only way, because there wasn't anything on the key to signify this. So I'm going to the pool with 4 children, and thinking, how am I going to remember this? And that's how I remember it.
Yeah.
So that's my team, and that's
And you did tell me before we came on stage that there was one member of that team that has evaded you almost throughout your entire journalistic life.
Arthur Duncan, the winger, who they used to say about him, he just would run, and if he opened the gates at the bottom, he'd just keep on running. And he's now in Australia and has been for ages, but is uncontactable and doesn't want to go back there like I do all the time.
Yeah, and it moved on with his life. Is he an architect, did you say, or something like that?
Chiropodist.
Chiropodist.
Yeah. Be retired from that now, I suppose. But so he's eluded me. I was thinking of other characters, and we mentioned Donaghy, we mentioned the Western shoot 'em up guys.
Yeah.
Davy Robb. Yeah. Davy Robb. Can we speak about Davy Robb?
Let's speak about Davy Robb. Yeah.
He finishes his career at Aberdeen, successful career at Aberdeen. He goes to America, and they're trying to really sell soccer, as they would call it, to an American audience at the time, mid-70s. Pelé, Beckenbauer, Cruyff, they're all there. But there's a sweet democracy about the whole thing. No one was any more famous than anybody else.
Because the American public didn't really know
they
who
must
was.
have. I mean, really, to it's embroidered slightly. They must have known who Pelé was. You would think, but by and large, they're all on the same level, all on the same page. And David Robb would tell me about them being out because they had to sell their game, go to functions, go to events, hype it up, meet celebs, and they're in a bar that they have to buy drinks. And Davy's going to the bar to buy Pelé and Beckenbauer and Cruyff a drink. And Pelé says to Davy, no, Davy, it's okay, you got the last round. well, you got the round the last time around. And I just thought, that is the moment, that is the peak moment for Scottish football. But Pelly says to Davy Robb, sir, I'll buy these. I'm no more famous than you.
I'm sure Maradona run a line for somebody somewhere.
But Davy was, Davy when I met him was, a big tatty-faced farmer type. And it might be hard to believe that he was quite a Romeo and a romancer in his American period in his life. So he had flings with Olivia Newton-John and Stevie Nicks. And then we're standing on the platform at the station. He's seen me off on the train back down to Edinburgh from Aberdeen. And he says, there was someone else. He said, I've never told anybody else this. Princess Caroline of Monaco. Which... I mean, they were all lookers. Yeah. And I suppose, in a way, Davy, with his hair and his wildness and his Scottish accent and his gift of the gab, would have been...
kind of a romantic hero of sorts. Yeah.
So Do
you believe in the concept of the celebrity fan?
Yeah.
No, I don't either.
I don't.
No.
But I'm very happy that Scarlett Johansson is a Hibs fan.
Yeah.
At least.
And how did that come about?
Well, the film Under the Skin. She's an alien, filmed in Glasgow.
It was indeed, yeah.
And she's luring these guys, these gadgets, these Glasgow young men into a white transit van. With the immortal chat-out line, can you tell me the way to the M8, And one of them, in the film Under the Skin, one of them has a Hibs strip on.
Wow.
And it's a Hibs strip from that cup final that Hibs lost to Hearts 5-1. So yes, that's artistic license. I'm claiming her as a Hibs fan because she's attracted to that young man in a Hibs strip, the worst Hibs strip in history.
I have to say, and I can actually trump that, because you may have not noticed that Pontius Pilate was actually born in the village of Fortingall in Perth when his father was a Roman legionnaire. So I actually claim Pontius Pilate as a celebrity St Johnson fan. A slight kind of discourse around history, but nonetheless,
you have to do that.
You've got to take liberties.
You've got to take
liberties.
Yeah.
Is it easier getting players now to interview them or not?
I don't think it's. In some senses, it's not as easy. It's getting them to relax into the job. So they're all programmed to respond and programmed to give 10 minutes about the game on Saturday. And I'm not going to go in and ask, have you ever read War and Peace? Or how well do you know Olivia Newton-John? I'm not going to go and ask these questions of them. But as I said earlier, the media-trained player who doesn't realise that what he's got... That's the thing about Scottish football. They imagine being a player, being in a dressing room when Jock Stein's talking or something. And some of them can come away with stories and tell you. And others, it just passes them by. And that's okay. That's all right. There's enough that can. Again, an age thing, I suppose. I'm more interested in the older player who's come out of it, who's thought about his hopefully he's thought about his career and his time in football, and he can reflect on it better than the guy in the midst of his career. It's probably not the time to do that.
Yeah. I'm wondering also if there's a way where we live in a more maybe culturally complex time where people have got different ideologies, attitudes, views. We're looking also at an era that's past, the era that you're paying homage to, where it was very, very common for football managers or football players to be bullies, to be people that would shout and scream at younger players and not care about, if you like, the kind of, the mental health of their teammates and all the rest of it.
Never discussed.
Never.
No. Not a phrase that rang at all through the 70s, through the disciplinarian managers, you know.
And to some extent, you wonder whether we're nostalgic for an era that had an awful lot of faults and flaws within it.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. Looking through, the lens of today, for sure. Yeah. But then I always laugh when a manager is described, or when the job of managing is described as, well, you've got to be able to shout at people, you've got to be able to put an arm around them. You know?
Yeah. As if there are only two types of people. yeah. But I get a kind of real vicarious thrill out of hearing these stories where, if I'm honest, you've mentioned 2 or 3 great examples where the players seemed much closer to the working class community that had produced their fan base. I remember we tell a story on Off the Ball about Willie Johnson, and he was playing for West Brom. He'd come back from the infamous World Cup incident that he was involved in, and he was a very, very good player. And it was Midlands derby, I think, against Leicester, and there had been a fracas in the goal mouth, and Willie Johnson, West Brom were getting a corner, and he was over at the corner flag waiting for the referee to kind of play on. And a guy shouts from the crowd, "Hey, Willie, you still selling that garden shed, right?" And he'd had a garden shed up, and
I think the transaction happened
during the
game.
Yeah,
during the pause before he took the corner or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. And you're just thinking, that would not be possible now, would it? No. And something's been lost there with. Maybe in the Scottish context, we maybe love that more than other nations. But I like the idea that the proximity to their community, to their fan base, was real. I mean, the Celtic team that only lived within kind of 20 miles of Celtic Park.
15 miles or something like that. Yeah. I mean, that's an aspect. In answer to your question, how much do Hibs mean to me, and you were surprised at what I said, I think that's a problem with football at the moment. I think I look at games mostly on the telly, and everyone's at it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Everyone's, and all the commentators and the co-commentators are at it because they say, "Oh, he's drawn the foul. Oh, he's gone down really hurt there." How do you know?
Yeah.
And I find it so frustrating. The last game I was at live was probably the Scotland Republic of Ireland qualifier. And Ireland scored early, if you remember, and then proceeded to waste time from the 10th minute onwards, and we scored 2 goals late. And these stats about the ball being in play for like 48 minutes of a 90-minute game.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. You spent a remarkable season, if I remember, in a previous book, where you travelled as a Hearts fan for a season. Tell me that. You're a big hibbie, and you're going on Hearts buses to away games and all. What was it like?
It was great. It was great. I mean, it was difficult on my own, but when I bonded with some Hearts fans, a chap from school who I wasn't that friendly with at school, but in desperation I phoned him up and said, "Look, Graham, can you take me along to the game, and can you give me some chat? Maybe we can meet some of your pals." And I did, and they became great
Good
buddies
friends,
for the course of the book. And then my uncle Mike, a doctor in Zambia, I hadn't been in touch with him for a while. I wrote explaining to him what I was doing, and he comes out with a revelation halfway through the season.
Yeah.
Your dad was a big Hearts fan. Do you know that?
Oh my God!
The dad
that
who
must
took
have
me,
been punishing.
the dad who took me to Hibs. But he was of the generation who went turnabout Easter Road. I can't believe that ever happened in Glasgow with Celtic and Rangers.
Well, I don't think it happens much in Edinburgh now.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't.
No.
I wonder what caused that moment. Was it the business of travel being easier and everyone having a car, and therefore away games being achievable?
I think there was that.
And then
the
a bit
other thing was to do with the rise of tribalism.
Yes.
I think that
Yes.
you're kind of born. It's a horrible thing to say, but you're born to define who you dislike as much as who you love.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned that the 5-1 game, there was a roar from the audience, which was just to kind of get it right up you. That world exists now in a big way, I think.
And it never did before.
No.
I think the year my father would have gone to games would be famous 5-1 week, terrible trio the next at Tynecastle, and enjoying both. And you had a favourite, but you're happy to go and enjoy and watch the other lot. And hooliganism, I suppose, probably had a part to play in that. We're talking as you say, tribalism. So yeah, where were we there?
Well, we were talking really about the idea of your Hearts, Hibs, your experience of supporting Hearts.
Yes.
Did you in any way feel converted to a different cause or not?
No, the way they play the game.
No.
High ball, No, I mean, joking apart. That wasn't. I liked the company. That was great. And I didn't at that moment have Hibs mates who I was doing that with.
No.
So I enjoyed it from that point of view. But this was the start of the Romanoff era at Hearts, so not the best era to be enjoying Hearts.
No.
And I missed a very good Hibs. I missed the Tony Mowbray very good young Hibs season.
Yeah.
Completely missed it, which Hearts fans still.
George Best doesn't feature, to my knowledge, in the book, although he featured, of course, in the history of Hibs.
Yeah.
Just too overexposed, too well known, too written about.
Yes, possibly. I met George opening up a tyre and exhaust centre at Wrestlerig the morning of Hibs versus Celtic, and he scored a great goal 4 hours later. But he smelled of the previous night. He was glassy-eyed. I did not think there's any way this guy was going to be on the park in about 4 hours' time. And he was, and he blurred past Roy Aitken, scored a fantastic goal after 10 minutes, and then went off after 15. I've done my shift, as it were. We like the fact George Best played. We like the fact Frank Sosie played for Hibs, but these guys were, in the autumn of their careers by then.
I'm wondering about the changes to the game. You talked there about Frank Sosie, who, in lots of ways might have been your archetypical European player with class and elegance about him.
Who was never going to play for Hearts.
Yeah, exactly. Never. No. High balls, he didn't do that. We had a similar example with Sergei Baltacha, who came from Ukraine or then the old Soviet Union. And the idea of the player that has all the time in the world and can make a ball talk, I used to love all of those things.
I interviewed him earlier this year.
Yeah.
He's in the early days of the war, he's watching rolling news, he can't sleep. He's trying to get in touch with his brother, who's gone down to the town square to get a Kalashnikov, who's armed and ready to fight. And he's wondering where, all his growing up in Ukraine, this is where my first club was, this is where I trained, this is where all these places were being blown up. Terrible.
Yeah, it's remarkable. He had one of the big things, of course, is his daughter died so young. Elena Baltacha, but they were a Perth family when he first arrived from Ipswich. He was briefly at Ipswich Town, and when they came, they arrived really in the Lada with nothing. In fact, but they were from a very big kind of Soviet sporting family. The wife was a pentathlete or something like that. And
Elena would practice tennis in the street. They'd mark out a court on the street, because presumably there wasn't a tennis court in Perth. And I knew them as a family because they lived kind of not far away from the Western Edge in Perth, not far from the McDermott Stadium. And I remember having conversations with Sergei, and it was just kind of like a very different life, because he'd featured at the Dynamo Kiev team. We forget now that they won the UEFA Cup the week after Chernobyl, and they were national heroes because of that victory. He was telling me the story, I think it's in Andy Dugan's book, that it's a requirement now, or an expectation, that when your daughter marries, that you'll buy the bouquet, the wedding bouquet, and during the wedding, you, the father of the bride and the bride, will travel to Dynamo's stadium and lay the bouquet at the foot of the Dynamo players that died during the Second World War, the famous kind of massacre of the Dynamo Kiev players, and that's something that he most wanted from the experience of Elena marrying. And it's astonishing when you hear glimpses into football culture that are not Scotland's, but actually, we've been enriched by their presence. Who would you say was the
overseas player that's most enriched your presence that's not Sosie?
Russell Latapy, perhaps? Yeah. I mean, Frank came with the credentials, European Cup win, 50 times played for France. I've never heard of this little patter merchant again in a Scottish tradition, you know? And would continue to play marvellously for Falkirk afterwards for a long time. Rangers, he was
brilliant
briefly.
Footballer.
Yeah.
The only thing, I think there's a slight kind of fraudulent side to him. Not to kind of prick your pomposity here, but the thing about it is he was the most capped player in the world for a while. But I worked out that actually the Caribbean Gold Cup, they got caps for playing basically in every cup tournament. So he was Trinidad and Tobago. So they, nipped down the road to Jamaica, they got a cap, and you're thinking, well, if St Johnstone players got capped every time they played in the League Cup, Henry Hall would have 200 caps,
Henry Hall figures in it on a chapter about the...
There is not a football book that he shouldn't feature in.
Unfortunately, he figures, well, not unfortunately, but he figures in the book about the bald footballer, the slings and arrows that the bald footballer has to endure.
And of course, he was called after the original Henry Hall, the band leader. Henry Hall was the BBC Symphony Orchestra live, and he actually was in residency at the Gleneagles Hotel for quite a while as the in-house kind of band leader. So his parents
must have gone there.
And Henry Hall was kind of and he was on the BBC live from the Gleneagles Hotel, Perthshire. Henry Hall and his band, And I always remember we had this. I must tell you this story. It'll take me 2 minutes. We had this brilliant song when I was a kid growing up, and it was Perth St Johnstone are the champions, they're the best team in the land. Henry Hall is the general and the leader of the band. And I thought that was really clever, right? But we got to we won the cup final, our first of our 3 cup finals recently that we've won against some toe rags from Dundee United it was, we beat in the final. And everybody came back from all over the Airts and Perths and all over the world because us being in a cup final was so unusual. And my very best friend who I'd been at high school with, and we'd used to run a St Johnstone bus from our school, and he had left. And actually he'd left. He was a very good pop and funk and jazz musician. And when the Average White Band became a big name in America, Alan Gorey was at our school.
Selling coals to Newcastle,
That's right,
wasn't it?
Well, it certainly was.
Selling soul music to America.
And they got in there, and they actually brought out the great record Pick Up the Pieces, but a great record by the Average White Band, and it so enraged James Brown that he brought out an answer record called Pick Up the Pieces One by One by the Above Average Black Band. And that was really good. But anyway, putting all of that aside, they were signed for Atlantic. Alan was maybe 3 or 4 years above us, 5 years above us at school. He's a big St Johnstone fan, remains so to this day. And he was slightly mentoring Davy Cumming, my mate, who was a musician as well. And Davy went to the States and he was in this band called Taxi, and they got a deal with Fantasy Records, a big jazz label at the time, that Gorey and the management at Atlantic had helped them with. And he brought out a 3-album deal. He still lives to this day in San Francisco, where he works now in the wine industry, in Napa Valley, and he's given up music, and it's all part of his past now. But he had this 3-album deal, and I remember we were in the Sandeman bar in Perth when we'd won the game, and these old guys started singing Henry Hall songs. And he turned around and said to me, he says, I've got 3 albums, but that's my biggest hit. He'd written it when we were in the buses together. So he was the guy that had composed Henry Hall. He is the general and the leader of the band.
Did you ever see a game on Christmas Day, Stuart?
Often, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've stopped now. There's a chapter in the book about the one and only one I ever saw, 1971, Hibs Rangers. I mean, different era. My father's only contribution to the culinary feast of the year would be to pour sherry onto the trifle. But he even skipped it that day, and we skulked out the house. So we had to walk because there was no transport.
71 was it? Yeah.
That was the last time there was a full card.
On Christmas Day, because literally it was when did Saturday fall, didn't it? It wasn't like, oh, well, there'll be...
Well, that's the thing. In England, I mean, I lead on to that chapter about the fact that, my father sometimes used to say, just to wind up his 4 children, Christmas is an English festival, So if it was a Saturday, football would happen.
Yeah.
Whereas in England, the card would shift around. They'd celebrate Christmas with football, but it would only happen in Scotland if it was a Saturday, and would continue to be so after England stopped the tradition altogether.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I remember that, and of course, much more common was the New Year derby, when you went to, and often that was actually a derby, and we would go to, in our case, through to Dundee or Dundee United, and enjoy it. I remember once we came to Tynecastle for one as well.
Yes, you'd have another game very quickly afterwards on the 3rd against your near neighbours, perhaps. I don't know. We'd go to East Fife. Floodlights, terrible floodlights. There's a chapter in about East Fife and their great team in the 50s.
They won the Scottish Cup in the 50s,
and should have won the league.
The
league. We're leading the league. When Hibs and Rangers were the big forces in the game at the time, East Fife were leading. But they got all these invites, East Fife, to Hansel floodlights in England, as all clubs were getting them. So with transport being what it was, 13-hour bus journeys down to the south coast took their eye off the ball. We'd be down inaugurating floodlights in Southampton, and then have a tough game against Celtic and inevitably lose it, and the league challenge fell away. So Icarus, they flew too hard for the floodlights.
Absolutely. Can I just ask you about other characters that are not players, because we briefly spoke about referees before we came on stage, and the one that always struck me was Tommy Tiny Wharton, who was the big kind of huge referee. He was from Clarkston, the south side of Glasgow, but he was almost like the boss of the referees. I think he was the chairman of the referee committee and whatever. The thing that I remembered about him was that he had a seasonal jacket. So he used to start the season with a black blazer with the SFA badge on it. But by around springtime, he'd move into this khaki outfit that he had that was like, it ain't half hot, mum, or something like that, right? And I always remember he was this big beast of a guy that used to love. And in those days, if you think of the kind of minutiae of Scottish social classes, he was middle class, wasn't he? Talking down to these working class neds.
He always addressed them as Mr. He had Bertie Auld tells a few stories. The late Bertie Auld, of course, tells a few stories about Tiny. In frustration, says to "Oh, you bandit! You've not given us anything all day." He says, and he said, "You'll find, Mr. Auld, that I gave you a shy in your own half in the 8th minute." Other examples, but yes, everything was Mr. That was never a penalty. Mr. Gregg, if you check the Sunday Post tomorrow, you'll see that it was.
But what I loved about these guys, it's sad now because we've moved on to VAR now, where conspiracy theorists try to work out who these guys really support. But back in those days, they actually told you where they lived in brackets after it. Right,
But Tiny was such a big guy, and he'd referee from the centre circle. There'd be some Stramash, Arthur Stramash, down the far end, leading to a corner or a by kick. And Tiny would just make an educated guess. He's like, I'm not going down there to come all the way back if it's not a corner.
Can I ask you about the quality of football analysis now? Media, radio, television, the changing game. We now expect to have kind of open all mics, every game covered to some extent, cameras at all the game, VAR now at all the top league games. Do you think there's a greater quality of analysis now, or when you go back in the days that you grew up, where you briefly worked at the Record, the Scotsman, there was these journalists that were kind of legendary, Andy Cameron, Alec Cameron, Jim Traynor, all of these kind of famous names of Scottish sports journalism. Has journalism declined?
There's too much football available to us now. I mean, it's easy. I'm saying I quite enjoyed waiting for the 10 minutes from Muirton after Cartoon Cavalcade. Yeah. And that would be all I would get. You know, and Scotland was very late to put live games on the telly. Yeah. You know, the SFA would have to, you'd wait until the last minute before, had every ticket been sold for Hampden before this crucial World Cup qualifier would be shown on the box. And Willie Allen or these people would decide, yes, you can watch, you know, or it's... so we see everything now. Yeah. Think of all the great goals that were scored that were never covered. Never covered. Henry Hall, Jim Pearson, John Connolly.
Ritchie, all of these guys,
they must have scored crackers that, you know, St Johnstone. I talk about Muirton. I mention it just to spread the mentions around. But I don't know how many times St Johnstone were ever featuring on Sports Scene or Scott Sport back in the day.
Actually, but until we moved to McDermott Park, it was not that common for us to be on TV at all.
So in answer to your question, everything's covered. Everything has to be covered. Players feature more in, you know, the words of players feature in reports more than you get the John Raffertys of this world, the sports writer I grew up reading, and the Scotsman. You know, he would maybe have Jock Stein's comment right at the very end of the piece. It would be his take on the game. Yeah. Now it's full of the words, which are pretty much the same wherever you go. Yeah. You know, well, it was a tough game, but you know, pick yourself up, dust yourself down. You know.
And I'm wondering about the modern form of journalistic and, you know, sort of football analysis where much is talked about shape and about how teams set up and
I
about...
don't know anything about that, Stuart.
No?
I think, I think we mentioned it earlier, you know, there are these... So there's stats as the thing, and there's guys in the profession who know about that, and I bow down to them, but I think, well... You know, just put the ball in the net. Yeah. Well, is that really ignorant of me?
Only it were that easy. One of the things that we're doing is we've got an opportunity to take questions from the room here, and of course we're streaming live on the World Wide Web via YouTube, and we have YouTube viewers as well, and they have questions for us. So let's give the first opportunity to the room itself. Anyone that has a question for Aidan or about the book, please just show your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Who's going to be first? Don't be shy, gentlemen there.
Why do you think, excuse me, relatively speaking, there are so few characters in Scottish football nowadays compared to some of the names you've mentioned that you've written about?
Very good question. I mean, it's all sorts of things. It's as you were talking, Stuart, it's the background, it's the life you've had before you come into the game. You know, if you are a kid who's come through the system into the academy, then your whole life is football. Yeah. You're plucked away from other experiences quite early. You're honed in that way. Your diet, your science, and all that. That's all you do. The working class element. Are there characters? Is there characterfulness being suppressed by the media training? You know, don't say that. You can't say these things. Are they screaming to come out as characters and they're not allowed to until later life? You know.
And is it the case that the globalisation of the game means that, for example, if you look at the young generation of Japanese players at Celtic, we don't get close to them in the way that you would do. You know, other players of another era, and therefore maybe their character, which might be rich, who knows, they may be very witty guys in their own language and their own, but it's not something that is conveyed in Scotland, and I do feel that there's been a real drop off in humour, even, you know. You know,
people and social media makes people tentative about saying some things. A war starts, it's turned into a war. It's just a quip someone's made, it's turned into some stramash, there's that word again, which runs in paper all week until the next game. So Yeah. Woebetide, where are the characters?
Exactly.
Okay,
Any other questions there from the room? Oh yeah, sorry, over there.
I'm intrigued by Aidan saying you've kind of not fallen out of love with Hibs, but you're not really a regular attender because they won the cup, which was Phoenix. It was everything. Is it because there's no likelihood that Hibs are going to win? And I mean this even from St Johnstone's point of view. They did very, very well, but realistically, it's unlikely they're going to win much more. Certainly not the league.
Yeah.
And they may win a League Cup, obviously not this year for Hibs. And they may win Scottish Cup, again, unlikely, unless Rangers kind of get Celtic in the semis or something.
Do I want them to win the Cup again? I got into trouble on Off the Ball the last time I was on, Stuart, by saying, because when I was last on, I was written a book about Hibs winning the Cup, and I'd said in it that they become the masochism of the Hibs fan. They're almost glorying in the failure, and I felt that. And I got abuse from the younger fans, which I was surprised at because they don't have the heritage of failure that I have. But they thought that was an odd thing to say. But I don't mind admitting. I mean, I quite like them not to win it again. I want my win to be treasured.
Yeah, no, it's a very odd thing because a lot of people say to me that. We won 2 of our cups during COVID where there were no crowds at the game. And did that weaken or strengthen the win? Now, I was very fortunate. I was at both the games. So for me, it was a very, very cherished moment. And I think you end up taking from games moments that will stay with you forever. I mean, I've got a photograph on my phone there. He was a young player at the time. He's now club captain. A young guy, Liam Gordon, who grew up in Letham, where I'm from, in Perth. And at the end of our victory, actually the game against Hibs, he ran over to where we were sitting. There was only about 4 or 5 of us working for Saints TV, and he came out with these bottles of Budweiser to give me to kind of drink with him. And I've got a great photograph of him running over with 2 Budweisers, and that moment is probably one of the greatest moments as my time as a St Johnstone fan, but I can't.
Do you want another one like it?
Another Budweiser or
another moment like it? Are you just happy with that?
Because you know what, I'm thrilled by it, and I'm thrilled the fact that he was a local boy from my housing scheme who was on the pitch on that day and knew what it really meant to us all. So it's difficult to imagine how it would be better without you getting into...
What must it be like supporting Celtic or Rangers?
It must be boring, beyond belief,
Cup after cup after cup.
Yeah, and I could invent some kind of tribal binary thing about us, beating Dundee in a final and all of that. Yes. But in reality, they're not even in the same league as us now. There's a way where I just kind of feel that I've cherished those victories. Yeah. And maybe it's the thing as well where you can't expect your children to live your life, and that's one of the things. Jack, who's my son, he's at school in the East End of Glasgow, and he's in the playground every day, and they're all kind of involved in their Celtic Rangers stuff and whatever. And he comes home, and I do the 2 cheeks of the same arse story and all of that. But I can tell I've lost him already. Do you know what I mean? He's not going to go to see St Johnstone every. He's not going to know who John Connolly is. You know. And I think in lots of ways, the vicariously trying to live your life through your children is a flawed thing, isn't it? Yeah. And you kind of regret the fact that you're not running with the Hibs team with your son every weekend.
Well, yeah, he goes on his own with his mates, and that's just a stage of life that you can enjoy, I'm sure we'll come back to watching games together. So it's all sorts of different reasons why not. It's just family too. I've got 4 kids, and I can't just gallivant off to Easter Road every second week,
Any questions coming from our YouTube audience? Nothing doing just now. Take another one from the room then before we wind up. Gentleman here with the maroon cardigan to match maroon shoulders, as my mum used to say.
And the maroon top with 5-1, funnily enough. Not a question for Aidan. I can't understand that you don't want another cup victory for Hibs, but maybe you're a bit more of a realist than we are. Because we're at 98, and when we won the cup in 98 against Rangers, that was 42 years since we'd won it. And we thought, well, that's it. But when it got better in 2006, and it didn't dilute it, when we won on penalties, it didn't dilute it, as Stuart's alluding to about being no one there. It's still a victory.
Yeah.
But, you know, it got even better in 2012. Yeah. So have a wee bit of ambition, laddie.
Yeah, fair enough. Can I just ask you before, could you give the microphone back? Sir, I was going to say, do you still feel, that there's, in the city of Edinburgh, the rivalry between Hearts and Hibs that you grew up with as a child?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not as horrible as it is through the West.
Yeah.
It's just rivalry. You just happen to support another team. And we've got loads of Hibs fans, Hibs friends rather.
Yeah.
And no, there is rivalry. That's healthy, surely. But there's... so, yes.
Yeah. Why is it then that Hibs have this kind of cultural romanticism, Irvine Welsh and all of these kind of actors? It seems to be Hibs that are the cool team.
Yeah. Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah.
They are. They are the cool team. Yeah. I mean, that's... but then I was going to mention John Leslie there. Not every celebrity... Yes. Where's that come from? I don't know. Because of the era, the famous 5 era, Hearts were just as good a team. We were no more stylish than they were.
Yeah.
And they probably won more than
But
us.
there's
at that
certainly a kind of romanticism that's grown up over Hibernian FC.
Yeah.
The Proclaimers have helped that. Sunshine and Leith's helped that. Irvine Welsh and his novels have clearly helped that.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Look at the Harry Gilzine poster from the Evening News from the 1972 League Cup. Just above Renton's Heath is he's going cold turkey, Brilliant piece of product placement there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, folks, we've come to the end of the launch, so before I tell you what's happening next, can we have a wee ripple of applause for Aidan Smith, please? So it's coming up to Christmas. What better than to buy a book for some friends? There's an atrium out there where the books are on sale, and Aidan will kindly occupy a table there and give you signed copies, personal messages, the whole works. So, it's not the most expensive book in the world. That's my book, Hey America, that's out this it's a lovely thing to put as a little gift in somebody's Christmas stocking, especially if they're big fans of a great era in Scottish football. So, Aidan, thanks for all your work on this and for you've got an amazing ability to just dig and dig and dig and dig. And I know that you have to deliver your journalism as well, but it's nice to have some of these great stories put together in a volume, so congratulations very much indeed.
Thank you.
And I hope it does very well and keeps my publisher in business, actually. Thank you, Aidan Smith.